Guys, we have a second court coming out of the Northern District Court of Texas who has just issued our second preliminary injunction to block the pistol brace rule. Unfortunately, it's just like what the Fifth Circuit did in Mock v. Garland, where it only applies to the plaintiffs. But stay with me here. It only applies to the plaintiffs. The plaintiffs in this particular case at the Second Amendment Foundation. Again, it's coming out of the Northern District Court of Texas. I just want to first remind you, there is a third case, also in the Northern District Court of Texas, also with a different judge than the ones that have been making these rulings so far. That's the one that I've interviewed the attorney with, that's Brito v. Garland. So that's the one that's out there. That's the one that, I mean, I'm a little biased because I know them, but I think has been very well situated. And that particular judge has done fantastic things in the last 6 months to a year. So, not all hope is dead, but where we are at is we have two injunctions against the rule. Both injunctions only apply to the particular plaintiffs. So I know what you're asking yourself. Tom, what's the burden here? Well, there's four things, but I really want to focus you in on two of them. The first one is the fact that the plaintiff, that's the good guys suing to block the rule, have a substantial chance of success. There's a substantial chance that they will win on the merits of the case. Broadly speaking, they're challenging on two different grounds. I realize there's more technical issues than that. They're challenging on something called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is basically saying that the ATF, through their flip-flopping by saying, yes, all these braces are okay, not once, but at least twice, and then changing their minds later, does this rise to a standard of being what's called arbitrary and capricious, among some other problems? And if the answer is yes, then they can't do that. They've basically painted themselves into a corner. They've let the horse out of the barn. They've opened Pandora's box, whatever it is that you want to call it. So that's the APA issue. The second issue here is just a straight-up Second Amendment issue concerning the regulation. Now, of course, the regulation that the ATF is going to claim goes back to the 1968 Gun Control Act as well as the 1934 National Firearms Act. But for those of you who've been playing along, the 1968 Gun Control Act basically just kind of echoed back to the 1934 National Firearms Act. And the NFA, the whole reason why we have SBRs regulated is because basically they're trying to go after gangsters, prohibition era sort of stuff that was originally going to include a registration of all handguns, which got blocked due to the NRA's last-minute lobbying, which of course basically introduced the NRA onto the national scene. So at the last second, they're trying to go after basically firearms that could be concealed, handguns, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, as well as some others. And then they kind of threw in full automatics. And lo and behold, handguns got dropped at the last minute. And we were left with this very confusing law that dealt with for our purposes here today, SBRs, which of course was subsequently challenged in a late 1930s case called U.S. v. Miller, where the Supreme Court made somewhat confusing ruling here, basically saying that, well, look, because short barrel rifles basically aren't used in war, therefore no go. I have followed this thread up in other videos, what the U.S. Supreme Court has done with that and how they've integrated U.S. v. Miller, basically talking about, well, again, if you want me to get into that, let me know in the comment field below. Again, I've already commented that in other videos. I want to get to the second prong here. The second prong concerns itself with, so again, the first one was, does the plaintiff or the plaintiffs, do they have a substantial chance of winning on the merits? Then you get to number two, number three. But the second one I want to deal with is number four, which is basically interest balancing and all that kind of stuff. Because if you're wondering, well, why are they granting the injunction, but why aren't they including everybody? You know, the millions and millions and millions, perhaps tens of millions of people who are out there with these braces who risk becoming felons. And I don't mean risk, I mean legally, if you get caught, you will become a felon. So saith the ATF. Of course, I think there'll be some very strong defenses on those cases, but just the same, you risk becoming a felon if you fail to take certain action, which we've covered many times in many other videos. But if you fail to take certain action, such as, taking the devices off, separating them so you're not running constructive possession issues, registering them, turning them into the ATF, destroying, just all that ugliness. Again, we've covered that in other videos. So I think what the reason why we're seeing the two courts have done this is they're looking at this and they're saying, look, you've got a chance of winning here, but when we look at kind of balancing the interests and looking at the public and so forth, there are so many of these devices, stay with me here, there are so many of these devices that we're too hesitant. I think you could say that they don't have the guts necessarily to just pause the whole thing. Now, you may say that. The courts, I'm sure, would say, look, just on balance, we're going to, in essence, preserve these issues. We're going to protect the plaintiffs, but we're going to move ahead with allowing things to proceed by not saying the whole rule, which, let's be clear, is definitely contradictory because they're agreeing that there's irreparable harms that can be done to the plaintiffs, but apparently not the millions and millions and millions of other Americans who lawfully purchase these items according to the ATF. Completely get that. I get it. I don't know what you want me to tell you on this, okay? But I think that's where the courts are getting hung up on this point, is they're looking at this and they're basically saying, you know what, there's so many of these things, we're going to preserve the issues. This is eventually going to go to the Supreme Court anyways. But that's where we get back to that third lawsuit out there. And it was referenced in the Second Amendment Foundation decision by the judge, basically saying, look, he's aware of the fact that there's two other judges out there. There's two in the Northern District Court of Texas who've taken up this exact issue. One of them's already gone up to the Fifth Circuit. Now we've got this case. And of course, we've got the third one, which hopefully will be coming down soon. My friend, attorney Lucas Weber from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, has assured me that the second that something happens on that, he will let me know. So, and I will do everything possible to immediately let you know as well. So stay tuned for that. If you've not already done so, please consider clicking like. We need to get the message out there, guys, about what's going on and why, not just kind of we need to get some analysis out there. We need to make sure that you down the lens are armed with as many facts about the law and about the courts and about at least what I think might be happening with them. Because information is power, and it's important that folks get to know this stuff. So please take a moment and let me know in the comments section what you think about all this. Is this going to be resolved by the third preliminary injunction coming out of the Northern District Court of Texas, or is this going to wind up coming? No one's going to stop this. We're going to have the injunctions going into effect on May 31st. We're going to have the pistol brace rule going into full effect without the grace period on May 31st. Where do you see this thing going? Are we going to be getting saved by the last bullet in the chamber coming out of the Northern District Court of Texas for my friend's lawsuit or not? Let me know in the comment section. I look forward to reading those comments. Of course, please consider clicking subscribe to make sure you do not miss any of our future content. And as always, I will see you in the next one.